Welcome to the BSG Master YouTube channel, where we discuss the business strategy game by Globus Inc. We discuss it for educational purposes, for nonprofit purposes, under the fair use exemption of the United States Copyright Act. So we discuss how the game is played, and we discuss what you need to do in order to do better the game. Okay, so in this video, we are going to discuss what you need to do at the beginning of the game. The first thing you should be doing is not making decisions. It's very compelling because it is a game. People want to start playing the game right away, but that's not what you should be doing. You should be learning how the game is played, not playing the game. You should, at first, you should not be making decisions. Okay? Decisions come after you have an idea of what you're doing and what situation you're in. Any decision you make in this game without good analysis and research and study is going to be a bad decision. The game is too complex for guessing. So any guessing that you do is going to be wrong. Okay? The game is complex. And also, the game takes a lot more time than what a lot of students expect. Okay? I think a lot of business students are used to having to spend a couple hours per week, okay? Maybe 2-3 hours per week, maybe doing a group project or something for a couple hours of meeting together, and thinking that that's good enough. And it may be for a lot of classes, okay? But for this game, you cannot do well in it unless you study it in detail for many more hours than you expect. Now, I can help save you time by pointing out the things that matter the most and giving you the benefit of my analysis. But I'm going to explain why I give you the information so that you can decide for yourself. I don't want you to trust me. I will explain things in a way that you can think about it and evaluate it and see what the game tells you. Okay, and then you can also measure everything that I explain. You can see the results, and they're measurable in the reports and also in the game itself. So the most important aspect of the game that students mess up on is the player's guide. A lot of students, they don't even read it, or if they read it, they don't take it seriously. That's because it is 40 pages, and it has a lot of information in it. Well, that's too bad. You have to study it like it's a final exam study guide, not as if it's just a simple thing that you can just briefly go through and it might be used for discussion or not. Okay, this has critical information that you need that can dramatically affect your performance. If you don't read it, you will be missing things that will have devastating consequences to your company. Okay, so if you study it properly, and not only do you need to just read the information, you need to analyze what it says, and you need to come up with solutions to problems that it presents. So it's not just a matter of downloading it to your brain. You have to think about it and evaluate it. Okay, so again, this is the number one reason why students do poorly, is they don't know properly what's in the player's guide, and they don't understand what it says. So I'm going to cover part of this right now. Okay, now what we need to do is point out, I'll point out a few things that are really critical. Okay, so when you start the game, you're not starting at the real beginning of the game. Okay, you're taking over a company in year 11, not year 1. So the simulated company that you're taking over started in year 1 and made a bunch of decisions for 10 years of this simulated game. And those decisions were not necessarily good. In fact, there were many, many bad decisions that they made. So part of your job is to look at what they did and also to understand the situation that they were in and how you need to correct what they did to properly handle the current situation. So the company did not do that. They should have done that. They should have built their factories at different locations. They should have built them of different sizes. They should have had upgrades that they started on. They should have expanded in certain areas that they didn't expand. All those were huge mistakes. Okay, now the good thing is all the other teams in the game are starting from the same point. So they're all taking over the same company configuration in year 11. But there's a race on. The race is to figure out what happened the quickest and the most accurately and correct the problems. Okay? If you just read the information and make a few decisions here and there and think you're going to do well, that's not going to work. Okay? You have to study and know what you're doing. So that means reading the player's guide in depth. So I'm not going to go through and read that with you page by page. I'm not going to absolve you of it either. You have to read everything there. If you don't understand something, you just don't skip over it. You make notes, and then you read it again. You read it again. You use dictionaries. You research other information. If there's words you don't understand, you go out on Google and research the words, and you make sure so you go through it enough so that you have what you think is a good, solid understanding of what it's telling you. Okay? You cannot just let things that you don't understand pass by because they could be critical information that could dramatically affect the performance, either positive or negatively. Okay, so I'm going to point out, so we already know you're starting in year 11, and you have a certain configuration of your factories, okay? So if we look at what you've been given, you have a company that has a certain configuration for its factories. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at some of this information. So let's go ahead and search for North America. Okay, so the game has 4 market regions: North America, Europe, Africa, Asia Pacific, and Latin America. And you're selling shoes in all 4 of those regions, but you're not building shoes in all those regions. Okay, so it's telling you here that your company is currently selling over 8 million pairs annually. Okay, and it's split across these regions in different amounts. Okay, so it has a certain amount of net revenue and all that. Okay, so here we can see it says your company currently produces footwear at 2 facilities, one in North America and one in the Asia Pacific region. The North America facility has sufficient facility space to assemble 5 million pairs of athletic footwear annually without the use of overtime. But management only installed enough footwear making equipment going into year 11 to assemble 4 million pairs without overtime. So already the North America plant is underutilized for its space. It has 5 million of space, but only has 4 million of equipment. Now, with overtime, that means that North America, if it filled up all of its space with equipment, okay, could do 5 million plus an extra 20%. That would be an extra 1 million pairs. So that means North America could be producing 6 million pairs in the first year of the game if you fill up the space with equipment. But it doesn't currently have that. It has 4 million pairs of production. With overtime, that would let you do 4,800. Okay? And it says the somewhat newer Asia Pacific facility, having sufficient facility space to assemble 6 million pairs, but currently has only enough footwear making equipment to assemble 4 million pairs without the use of overtime. So it's even worse for utilization. Okay, so 2 million out of the 6 million pairs of space is not being used. That's basically 1/3 of the factory space is empty. Only 2/3 has equipment. So it's also even more underutilized. Okay, that's a problem. It says you also you may install additional production equipment in the two facilities should you wish to bring the assembly capability up to 11 million pairs. Okay, it says you can construct additional facility space to accommodate more than 11 million pairs. So that means you can increase the factory space itself. Now, since the company isn't even utilizing the space it has, that might not be a good idea. Okay, at least not in your current factories. Also, this does not mean that these factories and in these regions are the appropriate size and they're built in the proper locations, because they aren't. Okay, so basically it is saying that you're underutilized. Okay, and so that's what you start with. Okay, so you start with 5 million pairs of space in North America and 6 million pairs of space in Asia, but only 4,000 equipment in both locations. Okay, so here's another really important aspect. Okay, so it talks about tariffs. Okay, so it's basically saying that many countries place import duties on footwear produced outside of their geographic region. Tariffs, which are payable when your company ships footwear produced in a region to distribution centers outside of that region, currently average $4 a pair in North America, $6 a pair in Europe, $8 a pair in Asia Pacific, and $10 in Latin America. Okay, it says your course instructor has the option to alter them. Most instructors don't do that. Okay, in fact, it's extremely rare. If it does, though, then you're going to have to change, where you build stuff. Okay, so for example, if there were no tariffs, then you should just build your factories in the cheapest locations. Okay, and that would probably be in Asia and Latin America because they have the lowest labor costs per pair. But you don't have that situation. You do have these high tariffs. Also, these tariffs are higher now than they were in the previous version of the game. So in 2019, the game changed and radically increased the tariffs. So the previous version of the game, in the beginning of 2019 and earlier, there was no tariff in North America. So that went from $0 to $4 per pair. Okay, in Europe, the tariff was $4 and it's gone up to $6. In Asia, it was $6 and now it's up to $8. In Latin America, it's $10. It was $8. But also, there were certain rules about tariffs in the previous version of the game. So not only was there no tariff in North America, the game used the concept of the North America Free Trade Agreement so that if you sent shoes from a North America factory to the Latin America region to sell them, you didn't have to pay a tariff. So basically, you could send shoes from anywhere to North America and not pay a tariff, but you could also send shoes from North America to Latin America and not pay the tariff. But if you sent shoes from Europe or Asia to Latin America, you'd have to pay the $8 tariff. So now you have to always pay the $10 tariff in Latin America if you ever send shoes from a different region. Okay, well, $10 is a huge amount of money. That's more than the cost of labor in that region or in any region. It's more than the cost of materials in most cases. So you don't want to voluntarily pay that high of a tariff, okay? So $10 is outrageously high. But even in Europe, where you have a $6 tariff, that's also very, very high. That's very similar to the cost of labor, okay? So you don't want to have the government to be a huge partner by taking, a large portion of your cost, okay, of your production. So you want to use your cash to build shoes, not to pay taxes. So this is one of the most important things in the game. So if you ever see any advice on YouTube and it doesn't discuss what your factories are and what the tariffs are, then already that advice is terrible. Okay, because you have to know this to make decisions about where to build your factories. And also the order that people describe how you operate the game and how you set values is usually wrong, okay? Because the game gives you a list of menu items, and the first thing on the menu is compensation and training, dealing with your labor costs. But that's not one of the first things. That's not the most important thing to deal with in this game. It has to do with what's in the player's guide, where your factories are located, and whether or not you are paying high tariffs, okay? And in addition to tariffs, there are some additional costs. So if we look at shipping and distribution center operations, okay, you have a number of options there, okay? And I'm going to go ahead and search for the cost of freight. Okay. So here it talks about distribution and warehouse expenses. We can see that the freight costs on incoming shipments of newly produced shoes, newly produced footwear from a facility to a warehouse in the same region currently costs $1 per pair. Freight charges on shipments to warehouses in a different region run $2 a pair. So there's another advantage of producing the shoes in the same region where you're going to sell them. So freight costs twice as much when you send pairs to a different region than where they're produced. So that means at the beginning of the game, when you have a factory only in North America and Asia, that means you're paying an extra $11 for every pair you send to Latin America, because there's a $10 tariff, plus you're paying an additional $1 in freight, compared to if you had a factory in Latin America that could just service its own region. Now, the same thing is true in Europe. You pay an extra $7 a pair. You pay an extra $6 in tariff, okay, and you pay an extra $1 in shipping for any shoes you send to Europe. And you have to send shoes to Europe from other regions because you don't have a factory in Europe in year 11 of the game. So really, one of the most important things to do is to build factories in those two regions that are sufficient to handle your existing demand at the beginning of the game. So the size of the plant does matter a lot. So just building a plant of 1,000 or 2,000 in those two regions is not enough to solve the problem. And we can see that. I will show you a model game of a team that I coached. And we can kind of see what they did in year 11, okay? And you kind of see what level of sales that they had already at the beginning of the game. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the bottom of this report. This is the company operating report for year 11. So I'm going to go all the way to the bottom. That's the balance sheet. And then I go one page up from that as the branded market performance. So this has a lot of cool information about the profitability of your company, okay? So let's look in Europe and in Latin America to see how many pairs of shoes this company is selling in year 11, okay? Now you can use the same reports, okay, to look at the year before you take over in year 10 to confirm this, okay? So this team also expanded their sales, okay, but still the sales in Europe and Latin America are still at the same about the same level, okay? But you can see right here. So in year 11, the company increased their sales up to 1937 in wholesale, okay, in Europe. And then they had 371 in internet. So if you add these two numbers together, okay, you're going to get around 2,300, 2,400 pairs. Now, that's just for internet and wholesale. It doesn't include private label. Now, if we go back to year 10, so this is the year before you took over, you still had 2,000 of sales, okay, in just wholesale, such as branded and internet. So that means, now, so you always have a certain number of rejects. That means you had to produce more than 2,000 simply to get 2,000. But if you did a bid on private label, then the quantity would be probably well over what you could do with just 2,000 pairs of production. So you can see right now in year 11, this company did a modest increase in demand. Okay, so around 2,400 in sales. But I'll go ahead and go to the private label screen. So here's private label operations. So this company also sold an additional 439,000 pairs. And they did a bid and it was accepted. They also did 439,000 in Latin America, and those were sold as well. So we can add that to branded production so that you can at least build a plant that can handle the demand that you already have, and then maybe handle a little bit more, okay? Because the thing about space is if you build factory space, you don't get to use it in the year that you pay for it. You have to wait a year, and it's used in the following year. So you have to build in advance, okay? So if we go ahead and go back to Europe, Africa, so we can see that we had basically 2,400 plus an extra 400 or 500. That's 2,800, okay, or 29, 20 that range. So we're already very close to 3,000 production, anyways, and that doesn't include rejects. So really, a factory of 3,000 is just barely enough to produce what you already can do in year 10 and year 11. So doing a 2,000 factory is going to be too small. It doesn't give you any room for expansion and for growth of demand. Okay, so and so that means if you wanted to handle that demand, you have to ship shoes from another location that you have to pay a tariff on. So if you want to get rid of tariffs, you have to make sure your factory is big enough. Okay, also, the smaller the plant is, the more costly the production is because of the economy of scale. So if you do a very small plant of 1,000, not only do you not solve the problem of the tariffs, you only partially solve it, but you also make the situation worse because your costs are much higher when you have a plant that's so small, because all of your fixed costs get divided by a small number of pairs. So having a plant that's 3,000 size means that with overtime, you could do 3,600. That means all your fixed costs are going to be divided by 3,600 instead of only 1,000 or 1,200. So that's very, very important. You could do the right thing for one step forward, and then you could do the wrong thing by making it too small and go 2 steps backwards. So instead of saving money as you expected by not paying the tariffs, it actually costs you money because the cost of production is so high because you made a plant that was too small. So the same thing is true in Latin America. So Latin America, you can see that it did have a smaller amount of demand in year 10, but it had one of the biggest increases in demand in year 11. So it had a big opportunity there. So if you look only at the demand in year 10, you see you had 1,275 plus 225. That's only 1,500. Okay, but that doesn't include private label. But private label will probably be under 500. So basically, if you just go only by what's happening in year 10, then you might think that a size of 2,000 would be good enough. But that's not good enough. If you can sell 3,000 pairs with overtime, you should do that. And here's a clear demonstration that in 1 year, the demand increased by whatever this team did for marketing and other things and their cost of production. They were able to sell 2.15 million shoes, okay? And if you add that to 419, that means they sold about 2,600, okay, in just these, not including another 400 or 500 in private label. So it means already the demand is unrealistic at 2,000. So you need 3,000 production with overtime to be able to sell this many shoes in year 11 without having to import them from another region. Okay, so the size of the plant matters. Okay, so another problem. Okay, so let's go back to the player's guide. Okay, so another problem here is look at the boxing and shipping fees for orders sent to footwear retailers. So these expenses amount to $4 per pair on the first 1 million pairs shipped out annually. It's $3 per pair on the next 2 million pairs shipped out. And it's $2 a pair for each pair in excess of 3 million pairs. So if you only send out 1 million pairs, you're going to pay the maximum cost in boxing and shipping of $4 a pair. The more you send out, the lower that cost goes until you get down to the cost of only $2 per pair. So getting your sales up above that first 3 million pairs, getting it to 4, 5, 6 million pairs has a big impact on your costs, okay? Because they start up high. So this is another example where small plants are bad, small production is bad. You want to get your production up to a higher level so you can reduce your costs, and this is part of economy of scale. Okay, so let's look at something else. Okay, so we looked at your costs for tariffs and freight, but we also have an issue of your equipment that you have. Okay, so you are given a smaller amount of equipment than you should have because you have factories that are larger and you're not filling them up. So right here, okay, so this, let me show you what page this is. So this is under production facilities. Okay, page 22. So it talks about there's two types of equipment. You have new equipment or refurbished equipment. Okay, so new equipment is $5 million per 250, and refurbished equipment is $3.6 billion per 250. So not that much savings. Okay, it's only $1.4 billion more. Okay, to go from refurbished equipment to new equipment. Okay, but the difference in production is dramatic. Okay, so the problem is that new equipment has a lot of benefits that you don't get when you buy refurbished equipment. So here it tells you that new equipment has 3 beneficial operating features not available with refurbished equipment. So new equipment enables better quality control, thus increasing the SQ rating of the pairs produced by 0.5 stars. Okay? That saves you money by making giving you a better output product versus your cost. Okay, the new equipment operates at higher speeds, such that worker productivity is increased by 500 pairs per year. Okay, so it improves productivity of your employees. So number 3, the added quality control capabilities of the new equipment reduces the reject rates on the pairs produced by 20%. That's a substantial reduction in rejects. That means for the same amount of materials and labor, you will end up with more shoes, and more shoes means more profits. And so the higher your margins are, the better this helps you. Because instead of having shoes that go into the bin because they're defective, you get money for those. Okay, so instead of being So a shoe that is defective is only a cost. It has no revenues. So you always want to get as many of shoes out that are not defective so that you can make the profits on them. The profits are much more important than their costs. Okay? So you need to be able to sell the shoes, and it's hard to sell your shoes if you have a lot of rejects. Now, the benefits of this also are more complex than this, because the reject rate is not the same for every kind of shoe that you produce. So the more models you produce, the higher the reject rate is. So if you want to have the greatest appeal to the broadest number of consumers, you want to have a very large number of models. Well, when you do that, your reject rate starts to go up tremendously. So if you try to do 500 models in year 11 of the game, it's very difficult to do that unless you have the proper setup, because you're going to get a very high reject rate, okay? Because the reject rate is normally at 500 models, if you haven't spent any money on quality, it's going to be about $15, or sorry, it's going to be about 15% are going to be rejected. So this is why it's also a very good idea at the beginning of the game to spend a lot of money on quality as an investment. So it's not just for the year that you do it. It helps you save money in the future, because the game tracks the total cumulative you've spent on initiatives like the total quality management, TQM, okay, and Six Sigma, okay, and also your best practices training on your employees. That has a big return. So if you spend a lot of money on training your employees and on improving your quality, it makes no sense to waste that by using refurbished equipment. So this was a huge mistake the company did. They cheaped out and saved a little bit of money on the equipment, but then they have been paying for it every year that they've been using that equipment. So because you're going to be using that equipment to build millions and millions of pairs, and hopefully you're going to expand your demand and have even more millions. So this is like throwing sand into the gears, okay? It just makes no sense at all. You want the best equipment, especially if it doesn't really cost that much more. So if you buy all new equipment, okay, your profits can pay for that equipment very, very quickly. So this is the tools of the trade. You want to use good tools. You don't want to make the production more difficult by using obsolete or older equipment when you could basically just get much better equipment. So already at the beginning of the game, you have this issue, okay? So look at the description here. It's in bold and black in the player's guide. That means it's really important. So it says the original 4 million pairs of new equipment in the North America facility was purchased at the beginning of year 5 and will be fully depreciated, scrapped at the beginning of year 15. So that means if you wait for year 15, all that 4,000 pairs of equipment in North America is just going to disappear on you, and you get nothing for it. And if you want to continue building shoes of the same level, you're going to have to buy all new equipment in that year. Okay. Now it says, assuming it was not sold off prior to year 15. Well, that's not a good assumption, because I'm telling you right now, you should sell off this equipment and get the depreciated value back from it as soon as you can, either year 11 or year 12, okay? So the longer you wait, the less money you get. So if you wait till year 15, you get nothing, okay? So if you buy brand new equipment in year 11, you'll have that equipment for the rest of the game. So if you sell off the old equipment, you get a discount, because basically you can roll the value of your existing equipment into the new equipment. If you don't do that, then you have to pay all for that new equipment with cash or loans. So there's a huge advantage to selling off your equipment as soon as possible. Now, you don't have to do it in year 11 technically, because it is new equipment in North America, so it doesn't have the disadvantage of refurbished equipment. Okay, it's just that you're going to get less value out of it if you sell it later on. Okay, but it's not going to really harm your production in the same way that the refurbished equipment will do in Asia Pacific. So it's more imperative that you get rid of the 4 million pairs of refurbished equipment in Asia Pacific in year 11. There's no advantage to keeping that around for year 11. So you might as well get that money back as soon as possible and sell that off, okay? And then just buy brand new equipment in year 11 to replace it. So that means you sell 4,000 of equipment in year 11 in Asia Pacific, and you buy back at least 4,000. But why 4,000? You should do 6,000. Why not fill up the factory and get the best advantage of economy of scale? You don't want to leave the factory 1/3 empty. Now, if you can't sell the shoes, then sure, you can cut back production. But let's be optimistic here, and let's assume that we'll find ways of selling the shoes, especially because you are dealing with shoes that are going to be at lower cost due to the better economy of scale. So your chances of selling the shoes are much better if your costs are lower, because so we always try to maximize economy of scale first, and then try to sell the shoes as much as possible in a profitable way. And then only if it hurts you, only if the extra production, only if that sags your price to the point that you can't make money on it, or you make less money on it, that's the only point where you sell off that equipment, okay? Or you restrain, you don't buy back as much new equipment, okay? Or buy new equipment, okay? So basically, you want to be optimistic and try to sell as much, as many shoes as possible. And the best way to do that in Asia is to get rid of all that refurbished equipment. So if one of these YouTube channels gives you advice and they don't talk about tariffs, if they don't talk about shipping, if they don't talk about this equipment that's going to expire on you, if they don't talk about replacing it, if they don't tell you the difference about new and refurbished equipment and the importance of having all new equipment, they are doing you a huge disservice. Because this is where you make the biggest difference in your game versus your competitors. So teams that figure this out will save a lot of money versus the teams that don't. So be very careful what you see. It looks like, a lot of times, the people on YouTube, they have high production values and they might look cool. They go through all the screens and it might sound right, might sound good. But the thing is, if you don't have a lot of experience in the game, you can't tell that they don't know what they're talking about because they haven't done the research. Okay? So even if they played the game, even if they've done well, they might not have had very good competition. They should have learned this, and this is what they should be relaying to you. So if they're not relaying it to you, then they are doing you a huge disservice. Okay? Because if other teams figure this out, they're going to have a huge advantage versus you. They're going to have a much lower cost. They're going to have higher productivity. They're going to have a higher quality, okay? And they will be able to not have this problem where all their equipment in North America and in Asia just disappear in the middle of the game. So this is like a landmine that is set up in the game. Now, it's also kind of strange. I think the developers did this on purpose to cause a problem in the middle of the game, because it makes no sense. Why would this company wait until year 5 to build equipment? Okay, what were they doing in years 1 to 4? Just twiddling their thumbs? Okay, so it's a shoe company, and they're not building shoes for the first 4 years of the game. So I don't know what they were doing. Maybe they were watching TV or something, but they certainly were not producing shoes. So it's very odd that they started building equipment in North America, okay, in year 5, and then they built in Asia Pacific in year 6, even though the tariff situation hasn't changed, okay? They should have built enough factory space in each region to not pay the tariffs, and they should have started upgrading the factories. So that's the other thing, is that the factories you're given have no production improvement upgrades. So that's a very important part of the player's guide. It describes what these options are. So I'm going to go ahead and look for improvement options. Okay, so here you can see that it's just you can invest in production improvement options at one or more existing facilities. Okay, it also mentions that the decision page involves entries regarding whether to purchase new or refurbished footwear making equipment, whether you need to sell any unneeded footwear making equipment at one or more existing facilities, how to invest in production improvement options at one or more existing facilities, and how to you can also build new facilities in Latin America and Europe. That's a really good idea, okay, for the reasons I mentioned. You could also construct more space in North America or Asia Pacific so as to accommodate the installation of additional footwear making equipment in the following year. Well, what we'll see is that those factories in North America and Asia are probably too big for handling their own region. So they were okay if you don't have a factory in Europe and Latin America, but they should have built a factory in Latin America. And if they did, you should not have a really big factory in Asia. Okay, certainly not 6,000 because you don't have that much demand in Asia. So that's already a mistake. Okay, so we can also look at what the different types of improvement option upgrades are. Okay, so here, so look at the rules. You may undertake one production improvement option per year at a given facility with a maximum of 2 production improvement options throughout the life of the facility. So there are 4 options, but you're only allowed 2 per plant. If you pick the wrong 2, that's a huge major mistake. These options have different effects based on which factory you use them for. So each factory has its own problems and its own solutions. So if you do the wrong options, you can make a factory completely unusable on a competitive basis for the rest of the game. It might be better just to shut down the factory if you cannot produce shoes cost effectively there because you bought the wrong options. So this is not something that you should play around with. This you should do analysis to figure out which options are the best. Okay, now I'm going to explain to you which options are currently the best for the current configuration. And it's not obvious. Okay, first of all, each one of these have a different cost. So you can see that the capital outlay or the capital cost of option A is $625,000 per 250,000 pairs of installed production equipment. Option B is cheaper at $400,000 per 250. Option C is $1.2 million, so that's double what option A is, okay, and 3 times what the cost of option B is, and that increases the SQ rating, okay, by 1 star. Now option B cuts the setup costs, the production run setup costs by 50%. So that's associated with how many models you do. So whenever you do a certain number of models, there's a certain fixed setup cost that the factory has to pay. Whether you do 1 million shoes, 5 million shoes, 10 million shoes, it's the same fixed cost. But that means that the cost per pair varies a lot based on the size of the plants, okay, and whether or not you have option B. So option A cuts the reject rate by 50%. So that could be good in certain situations where you have a high reject rate. Okay, then option D is the purchase of robots to assist assembly and boost worker productivity by 50%. So this affects your labor cost per pair. So it lets your workers produce more shoes, and therefore you don't need as many workers, and therefore your cost per pair is lower because the workers you have can produce many more pairs than they would otherwise be able to do without the robots. Okay, it does not directly lower the salaries of the workers. Okay, the salaries of the workers actually could be increased to increase their productivity as well. But it does lower the cost per pair of labor because it makes the employees that you have more productive. And that reduces the cost because you're dividing by the number of pairs. Okay, but this is a lot more expensive. So this is 3.6 million per 250. So if you thought option C was expensive at being 2 to 3 times, the other ones, this is 3 times the cost of that. So by far, option D is the most expensive. But let's look at it very carefully. It says a capital outlay of 3.6 million per 250,000 pairs of installed production equipment. Okay, so it's not based on the size of the plant in space. It's based on how much equipment you currently have installed. So if you reduce the amount of equipment that you have installed on a temporary basis, you can dramatically cut the cost here. So in North America, you have a very serious problem with labor costs. Okay, and you don't have to trust me on that. You can go to the analysis and go to the reports to look at your production costs per pair in North America versus Asia, which is the only places where you have factories at the beginning of the game. So let's go ahead and I'll look at the company operating report. And I'm going to move up to the production costs for this team in year 11. Okay, so right here, we're going to have the production information on production and workforce. So we can see what they're building in year 11. They're building a pretty high quality product, 8.1 stars in North America. They're doing 8.1 stars in Asia for branded. They're doing 350 models in North America, and they're doing 400 models in Asia Pacific. And that's based on the fact that they do not have the B upgrade in year 11, but they did expand the plants, and so this is above average. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at the CIR report for year 11. So if we look at this, so this is Team C. So if we look at the model availability in all the regions, you can see that the average is 225. Okay, so again, this last column here is industry average. And if we look at the SQ, it's 7.5 or 6.5. Okay, and then look at the price. So if we go to Team C, we can see that they're producing more models than average, but they're not at 500 models, but still 350 is pretty good. So they're very close to 350, and their SQ is above average. Okay, and their price is above average, but that's okay. So the question is, are they selling the shoes? Okay, and apparently they are, because they did increase their overall demand and their market share has increased, and they actually ran out of shoes a little bit. So they sold every single pair that they wanted to sell in North America. Okay. They also won their private label bid. So if we look at the graphs here, we can see that Team C has slightly more models than anybody in both internet and in wholesale, and they had a higher price, but they also had a higher quality on average. Okay, because their price and SQ combination rating is above average here. Okay, so apparently they were pretty successful because they did sell all those shoes. Now the question is, did they make money? Okay, so that's something that this report doesn't show. It doesn't show anything about profitability. So just because you have high market share, okay, does not mean that you are making a lot of money. So they did not have the highest market share, but they were above average. The average market share was 12.5. But there were a couple teams that had a slightly higher market share, 13.4, 14.7, but they're doing different things. So this is Team C. So that was Team A, D, E, G. They all had a little bit higher market share. So let's go back to the FIR report for this team. And let's go ahead to the top here, and let's see how Team C did. So Team C, first place ranked, okay, with a score that's 10 points higher than the nearest competitor. And let's look at their EPS. Okay, so Team C had the highest EPS, $5.36. They were basically $1.29 higher than the nearest competitor at Team A. So it just proves that they were able to do well on EPS with their current configuration, even though they didn't have the highest market share. Okay, so let's go back to the CIR. So they had more models than average, okay, but not the maximum in North America. So let's look at Europe. In Europe, they had a very high market share, okay. It looks like get above average. They did have 347 models, okay, which again was above average. The average was in the 230 range, and their quality was above average. Okay, they also did sell all their private label bid. Okay, so what we can do is see that they did not run out of stock, but they did not probably have a huge amount left over either. Okay, so nobody ran out of stock. So let's look at the next region in Asia. Okay, so in Asia, again, the model availability here was closer to 400, which is well above average. So basically 68% above average. Their quality at 8.0 was well above average. Okay, 25% above 6.4. Now they had a higher price, but it's justified because they have a better quality product and more models. Okay, they've also dramatically increased their advertising. They've done things to as an investment for the future. They've gone to a one delivery time. Their retail support is a little bit higher than average. Okay, but they also won their private label bid. So they ended up with the highest market share in this region, in Asia Pacific. So here you can see that they had the highest market share, so they had more models, slightly higher price than average. So let's look at Latin America. Okay, so in Latin America, again at 397, they had quite a bit higher number of models than average. They had a higher SQ than average. They had a higher price, not a hugely higher price, but they also had the highest market share at 18.9% in Latin America. They also won their private label bid. Okay. Also notice that their private label bid is larger than other teams. So this is actually a good situation because actually, you look, there's opportunity here. Not all the teams are even bidding for private label. So this team might be able to make quite a bit of money by taking advantage of that situation. Okay, so let's go back to the company operating report. So we've just established, okay, that the demand is there to build a plant of 3,000 in Europe and 3,000 in Latin America because the company is able to sell those. If we look at the actual production plans for this company, the facilities and equipment, you can see that they have built in year 11, they built a plant of 3,000 in Europe and 3,000 in Asia Pacific. And so that cost them $54 million in one and $54 million in the other. Now, the company also did build some space in North America. So it did have 5,000 space, so they also built some space there. And that was, again, 12,000. Okay. But let's look at the equipment that they used to fill that space. So in North America, the team apparently they ended up with 4,000 of equipment from leftover from the previous year. And so that's normal, but they built 1,000 new equipment and they didn't sell any equipment this year. So they're apparently delaying the sale of that equipment and they're just running with what they have, but they did 1,000 new. So that the 1,000 new that they did, they're going to have that for the rest of the game, so long as they don't sell it. Okay, but they still have 4,000 of equipment that's going to expire in year 15. So they need to deal with that. Okay, they're just delaying it right now. But in Asia, you can see that they dealt with that problem. So in year 11, they sold off for that 4,000 that they were given. Okay, and they bought 6,000 to replace it. So they now ended up with 6,000 equipment. So they filled up their factory space with all the equipment. And now here you can see the percentage of new versus refurbished equipment. So now in both locations, in Asia and North America, they have 100% new equipment. So this started out at 100% refurbished equipment. But by doing this sale of 4,000 and buying this 6,000 new, now this 6,000 is all new equipment that they could keep for the rest of the game, and it doesn't harm their productivity, their reject rate, and their quality. So also in year 11, they started doing their upgrades. Okay, so they also bought the B option upgrade for production improvement. So this is going to cut their cost of their setup cost in half next year. So they had to pay for it now, and then they'll be able to use it next year. So, but the cost is based on how much you have per installation equipment, okay, installed equipment. And so it's a little bit more expensive in Asia because they installed 6,000 of equipment there. But that's okay because they will make this very, very profitable, and they can use it right away in year 12. Okay. Now, as far as the other upgrades that should be done, this is going to depend on the year and which region you have. So very likely, this team should build an option D in North America if they want to keep that factory, so they can lower the cost of labor, because that's the biggest problem in this region. So we can see that. I'm going to go to the production screen. So if we look at the production costs here, the branded production costs in North America versus Asia. So we know we're building the same quality product. We're doing 8.1s in both. We're doing a slightly higher number of models in Asia versus North America. And so the cost might be a little bit higher for that, but let's look at the overall, the quality is the same. The reject rate is a little bit higher in Asia because, again, it has a little bit more number of models. So here you can see what I was telling you about the reject rate depends on the number of models you produce. So if you go up to 500 models, it's going to cost you a lot of money. But notice it's not anywhere near 15%. That's because this company is also spending a lot of money in TQM and other quality improvement options. So this is keeping that reject rate down right away at the beginning of the game. Okay. So if we look at that, we can see that the TQM costs right now are $366 a pair in North America and $370 a pair in Asia Pacific. So that will help reduce the rejects. Also, the company is doing a lot of best practices training. Okay, so they're spending a total of $66.54 in best practices, okay, in North America, and $87.50 total in Asia. Now, what that really translates to on the screen for labor, okay, for compensation and training, that really means that they're spending $7,500, the maximum in those areas. So it's $7,500, and so this cost is based on the number of employees. So they clearly have fewer than 1 million or 1,000 employees. Okay. So, but basically, they're spending a lot of money on best practices. They're spending a lot of money on TQM to keep that reject rate down. But if we look at everything else, but they're still very comparable to each other here. So if we compare row by row, what's the difference in cost? So if we look at the total cost in North America is $30.66. Okay, and in Asia, it's $26.91. But in Asia, the number of models is slightly higher. So if we look at the production run setup cost, the production run setup cost is a little bit higher in Asia, but still reasonable. It's under $2 a pair. Okay, and then in North America, it's $1.70. So it would definitely be a lot more expensive if they tried to do 500 models in year 11. Okay, so if we looked at North America right now, the cost is $9 million. Okay, and it's divided by enough shoes to bring that cost down to $1.70. If you do 500 models, the setup cost, the normal cost for setup cost is $15 million. Okay, so that would be a significant increase, about a 2/3 increase in the cost per pair. So that would bring the cost up to in the $4 range, maybe $5 range, and same for Asia Pacific. So for now, they've chosen a number of models that is cost effective. They're keeping the cost under $2 a pair, and they are competitive because they have a higher than average number of models. Okay, so if you look at everything else here, though, the biggest difference between these is this production labor cost. But look at the production labor cost per pair in North America is $8.36 a pair versus Asia at $3.67. That means the price is basically more than double. Okay, that's a serious problem. Now, even though the price per pair is more than double, you do get, and you are paying a lot more in salaries. So here we can see what the salaries are. Okay, so the average salary per worker for total compensation in North America is $51.4. Okay, and in Asia it's $18.6. Okay, so it's more than twice the salary, but something else affects the cost effectiveness of that, and that's the productivity. So here you can see that the productivity is 1,000 higher in North America than in Asia, but that doesn't make up for the difference in labor costs. So this does not change throughout the game, that ratio, unless you do something to reduce your cost in North America. And that's where the production improvement option comes in play. That option D, that could be very expensive. It will reduce the cost, not by lowering the salaries, but by increasing this number here, this 5214. So if you increase that by 50%, right now, that's going to increase that into the high 7,500s and maybe the low 88,000 range. And that will reduce the cost per pair. Okay, so it will still be more expensive than Asia, but it's not going to be double the cost. It might be just like $2 or $3 higher than Asia. And again, this is where the tariffs matter. So if you pay a $4 tariff for North America, plus an extra $1 shipping, that means to send shoes from Asia to North America costs an extra $6 a pair. Okay, I'm sorry, $5 a pair, $4 plus $1. Okay, and right now the labor cost is about offsets that. Okay, it's only a little bit less than $5 a pair. Okay, so if we don't do anything, then we might as well produce the shoes in Asia and pay the tariff and pay the extra shipping, and just use one plant and get a better economy of scale there. Okay, and then that way we don't have to pay the fixed costs in two locations for things like, there's a lot of fixed costs like supervisory costs, facilities maintenance, depreciation expense, and also the setup costs. If we pay the setup cost in one factory for 500 models, we can just use that setup cost to sell shoes in two different regions. So if we did not improve the labor cost of North America, then you should probably get rid of the North America plants, because you can produce the shoes and just pay the tariffs and you'll still be better off. But that's not what the case is. If you buy that option D, that brings the cost of North America production much closer to Asia Pacific, and therefore it's not worth paying the $4 tariff plus the extra $1 in shipping. Okay, so this is why the tariffs count. Okay, and having a higher tariff changes whether or not the factories are more cost effective. So this is also true with Europe. Europe has a higher tariff. Therefore, as long as the cost can be brought into a reasonable range of Asia Pacific, you don't want to pay that $6 tariff plus an extra $1 shipping. So why pay an extra $7 to send something to Europe when you can do it for less than that difference of $7 in Europe itself? And of course, in Asia, it's just even more significant. Okay, why pay $11? Okay, when you can produce it for definitely at the same price or lower than any place else. So the best case for building a new factory is in Latin America, but that doesn't mean that building in Europe is a bad idea too. Okay, it's a good idea. for the exact same reason. It's just you get more benefit in Latin America because the tariff is higher. So this is why the advice in the previous version of the game is different. In the previous version of the game, Europe was only a $4 tariff. And the labor cost is about $4 higher than Asia. So you might as well send the shoes from Asia and get the benefits of economy of scale in the previous version. So that's why in the previous version of the game, our common recommendation was to not build a factory in Europe. But with the higher tariffs, it now is more viable. So the strategy is different because the game is different. Okay, so if you're watching other YouTubers, what do they say about this? They usually are entirely silent. They just tell you, oh, let's build a plant in Latin America or something. And they don't say why. They don't say how large. They don't tell you what upgrades you need to do. Okay? So the upgrades that are most important for North America is the D upgrade, okay, which affects the labor cost because that's the biggest problem in the North America region. The second upgrade you can do is the B upgrade, which lets you do a larger number of models when you have a smaller plant. Okay, but you're only allowed to do 2. So that means you cannot do the option C or option A, but that's okay because if we go back to that, there are ways to do those effects using other tools in the game. So there are other ways to reduce the reject gradients. We've already covered some of them. Having new equipment, spending more money on TQM, spending more money on best practices. Those all improve the reject rate, okay? So you don't really need A. Now, if you can get A because you don't need to do anything else, then that's fine. So in Europe, Asia, and Latin America, doing option A would be fine, but it's not the highest priority item. Usually it's better to buy option B first to reduce the setup costs so you can move to a higher number of models more cost effectively and faster than the other teams. And that will greatly increase your demand and your market share, okay, before they even realize what's happening. And if they try to copy you, if they try to do 500 models and they don't buy option B, if they don't expand their plants, it's going to cost them a huge amount of money. They're going to lose money. Okay, so it's not just a matter of doing 500 models. It's doing 500 models in a cost-effective way. That's how you win the game. Okay, any fool can just set the number of models to 500. Okay, in the branded production screen, but that does not mean you're going to be able to do it profitably. Okay, you'll lose a ton of money if you do that if you don't have the right upgrades and your plant isn't big enough. Okay, and if it's in the wrong area. So this is also why you don't want to do 50 models, okay? That's because in the long term, 50 models does not save you that much money, and it has a big impact on your overall demand, okay? If you do 500 models, and if you have option B, and you do a plant that's big enough, your cost per pair for the setup cost is going to be well under $2. So already this team is paying less than $2. But even when they expand to 500 models, you'll see that the cost will be around $2 or less. So that's a small amount of money to pay for a huge increase in demand. And with increased demand, you also have a better economy of scale and you have lower costs. So things are related to each other. Okay, so if you go up against a team that's doing 500 models and they have the right configuration and you do 50 models, they're going to beat you every time. Okay, because that 500 models is going to give them a level of economy of scale that you'll never be able to produce. Okay, so we're looking at, again, the reports. So it's not just me telling you this and you have to believe me. You can follow the details of the report and do the analysis. Okay, so in the player's guide, we have looked at a lot of key information. So basically, you have option A, option B, option C, option D. In North America, this one is the most important, option D, but option B is okay as well. So sometimes teams will do option B first, and they don't mind paying the full price for option D in North America. And that will let you do 500 models much more quickly, starting in year 12. Okay, but in Asia, you don't want to really do option D in most cases, okay, in a regular class game. because option B and option A are fine. You don't want to do option C ever in this game because you don't really want to have your SQ rating increased by that much. And there are plenty of other ways. There are better ways to improve your SQ rating. And you don't even need to have an SQ rating that's even above average because there are other ways of getting, for example, a very high image, an image 100, without having a high SQ. That's one reason why a lot of teams will raise the SQ is because they're trying to get a high image, okay? Because that's the only way they know how to do it. But that's not the best way to increase your image. So later on, when I discuss the details of the actual decision screens, then we can see all those different ways to improve SQ, and you'll see that it's going to be very obvious that you don't need option C at all. You can get the SQ you need at a very affordable rate. So therefore, you don't want to waste one of your two options on that item. Option B and option A are best for most plants, and then option D and option B are best for North America plants. Okay. So that should basically cover the most important aspects of the player's guide. But there's a lot of other information here, such as exchange rates and other things. But basically, the key information that has the biggest impact on your game, we just covered. So I know it's gone long, but hopefully you feel that you've been rewarded by sticking along with this advice and this analysis, so that you can see how important it is to your game, and also the fact that usually you're not going to find this information from any other source, because you have to be an expert to really know how to analyze the game to find this information. But again, all the information is based on the reports that are available to you in the game starting before year 11. Okay, so when you get the decision in year 11, you could look at the reports for year 10 to back up all what I said about what your demand is in Europe and Latin America for setting your sizes and all that. So I don't want you just to trust me. I want you to follow the results. Okay. So that was going to be it for now. So thanks for staying, and look forward to my upcoming videos where I'll go into great detail on the decisions that are needed for the game. Thanks so much.